Hello and welcome to Lesson 1 of the OPTAVIA Healthy Habits Game Design Challenge. My name is Lindsay Buckle and I'm the Manager of Strategy here at Legends of Learning. And we are so excited that you're here joining us today for Lesson 1. Our goal with the Game Design Challenge is to empower students through a virtual game design challenge with support from game development professionals. Experts from OPTAVIA, GameWright, Calliope Games, Ravensburger, Unexpected Games, and Asmodee are thrilled to be able to share their wealth of knowledge with students all over the world. They'll be discussing everything from healthy habits to game development, as well as prototyping to playtesting. And if you're a winner, you'll receive a premium swag bag with games from each of these amazing companies. Today, we'll be diving into Lesson 1 of the Game Design Challenge. Lesson 1 explored creating your game concept and planning out your game design. Here to speak with you all about Lesson 1 is Corey Konieczka from Unexpected Games. Corey started his design career in 2005 at Fantasy Flight Games. He spent 14 years designing a wide range of different games and expansions, such as Battlestar Galactica, the board game, and Star Wars Rebellion. He now runs his own game studio called Unexpected Games. Corey is going to dive into theme and storytelling in games and why it is so important to include these aspects in your game concept and planning. After his presentation, we are going to open up the floor to your questions. Corey, feel free to take it away.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everybody. Glad you could join us here. This is going to be a fun little dive into this. We'll first, of course, need to share my screen and I can talk to you all about theme and storytelling in board games. So, Lindsay did a great job kind of introducing a lot of what I've done in the past and who I am. So I've designed a lot of games throughout my life, and a lot of them are generally games with a strong theme and a strong story, which is why I chose to talk about that today. Another thing worth mentioning is I didn't go to school for game design, right? At least at the time that I was going to school, it wasn't an option. And so my college degree was actually in graphic design. And I'd been doing computer programming before that, but it turned out that graphic design was a great entryway into kind of the whole board game industry. They're very similar fields, and I use a lot of the same skills there today. So, like I said, I've made a lot of thematic games throughout my career. I've worked on a lot of big licenses. I've worked on things like Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Battlestar Galactica, World of Warcraft, Lord of the Rings, Gears of War, to name a few. And they're all different stories. They're all different worlds that we got to make games in. It's not like you're making a game of Monopoly or a game of Hearts that you're playing with cards. These games are ones that are really focused on who the characters are and what you're trying to feel and do. As you can see, there are a lot of other games I've worked on, and they all tend to be those sorts of experiences. So I wanted to dive into a little bit about, well, what is a thematic game? What kind of sets it apart from the thousands of other games that are out there? And my definition for what a thematic game is, it's a game with a strong focus on the story, the characters, and emotion. And so what exactly does that mean? To me, that means that the game is more than just what you're doing on your turn. It's not about the fact that you're rolling dice, even though you might be rolling dice. It's not the fact that you're playing cards and trying to do different things. Like, the theme is, in my opinion, just as important of an element. It's, well, why am I rolling dice? What is my motivation as a character? What am I trying to accomplish? So why do people play thematic games, and why would you maybe want to make a thematic game for this challenge that you're working on? I think one of the appealing parts of this is it allows your players to be somebody else. You can be a famous character from a movie if you're working on a movie thing, or it could just be a character that you've made up, or it could even be a character that the person who's playing the game has made up if you're doing a role-playing game. There's something really enticing about being able to escape your everyday life and just kind of be someone else for a little while. I think it's one of the joys of thematic games. I think another reason why I really like thematic games is they are about the emotions and what you're trying to do and what you want players to feel, right? If it's a game that's all about betrayal, you want people to feel suspicious of each other. You want people to feel tense. If it's a game that's about cooperating and working together, you want them to feel that sense of partnership and that they're grouped together, and you want people high-fiving each other around the table. I think that when I design a game, one of the important things is deciding, how do I want people to feel before I even start thinking about what they're actually doing? And I'm going to say this, even though I think a lot of other designers may disagree with this statement, but I think the focus of thematic games, it's on having fun. Winning is secondary. That means that your main goal isn't to win. I think a lot of people play games to win. That's kind of their main goal when they play games, and that's fine. And you need that. You need there to be something that you're trying to do, something you're trying to accomplish in order to win the game. So you've got to give that direction. But at the end of the day, you want people to be smiling. You want people to be enjoying the experience. And I think that thematic games it's much easier to do that. It's much easier to make people focus on the story and the fun that they're having. Even if you're not winning, you should still be able to enjoy yourself. So when you are telling a story in a game, there are lots of different ways that you can do this. And there are many games out there that tell stories in very different ways. The first way that a lot of games do it is the introduction. So some games, they're even as simple as Monopoly, will just give you a setting. They will tell you, like, you are a real estate agent and you want to have the most money at the end of the game and everybody else to be bankrupt. That's basically the story of Monopoly, as far as I can tell. But it does have a story, and it's mostly told just through the concept of what the game is and what you're trying to do. Other games can go deeper into this, right? Other games might have like a little short story at the beginning that's a couple of sentences long that tells you who the characters are, what you're trying to do. And some games go much deeper than that. Well, there'll be pages and pages of them. I made a game recently that actually had a comic book that told the story. So there's lots of ways that you can do this. Another way to add story to your game is through the use of flavor text. And this is a term that maybe not everybody is familiar with, but sometimes you'll have cards that you play that will not just have the effect of what happens. The card won't just say move 2 spaces. It might tell you why you're moving 2 spaces. It could just be the title of the card says sprint, which means that you're running, or maybe it says a little story like you run for your life, move 2 spaces. And so injecting those little bits of flavor, as I call them, into your text and into your cards can actually add a lot of story to the game. Because if I play a card that says move 2 spaces, and I play the same card that says you run for your life, move 2 spaces, they both do the same thing, but they make me feel a different way. Like, why am I running for my life? Like, suddenly I'm really tense. I'm really excited. Like, ooh, what's going on? Another way of telling stories is through images. They could be just the cover of the box. They could be through the drawings that you put on cards. And I mean, some people go a lot deeper into this than others. There are plenty of games that have very little imagery that can still be thematic. But there are some games that will actually have very little text and will instead try to focus on, we're going to tell the story through pictures and through kind of the visual experience that you have. Those, in my mind, those are the three main ways that you can try to inject some story into any game that you're making. And sometimes you can even combine these together. Like I said, with this comic book in our game, we used images and text together in kind of a visual way of telling you the story. There is, I guess, one final way to tell stories, and that's through the player's actions, right? What are the players doing, and what do you call those things that they're doing? Is it called moving? Is it called running? But also, like, is it a game where, the example I used earlier, we're trying to betray each other? That's something where the players' actions themselves will actually tell the story, as opposed to the text and the images and that sort of stuff. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. So I've got an example. Here's one of the more popular games I worked on called Star Wars Rebellion. And it was a great honor for me to be able to work on a Star Wars game. I'll tell you that. When I was your age, I was watching the Star Wars movies, I was reading books, I was so into it. And so being able to actually make a game in it was awesome and a huge honor. But if you look at this example, there's different parts that you can break it down. Like, what are the parts of the theme that you can use in your game to help people feel like they're actually in the world of Star Wars? So the first is, what is the conflict? What is the main goal that the players have? What are they dealing with? So in the example of Star Wars Rebellion, the conflict is, obviously, we've got the rebels and we've got the Empire, and they're fighting over the galaxy, and the rebels are outnumbered and the Empire has built a Death Star. Like, there are lots of smaller conflicts in different movies, but every story has some sort of conflict. And this is the action that kind of motivates people to do what they're trying to do to win the game. So identifying what your conflict is can be very helpful when you're making a game. The second thing is, who are the characters? In something like Star Wars, of course, we've got Han Solo, Princess Leia, Darth Vader. You've got these recognizable characters in a story like that. But when you're making your own game, you get to create those characters. And so you can decide, like, are they people like you? Are they people like you aspire to be? Are they characters that are nothing like you? Are they even people? Are they animals? Like, your characters tell just as much about your game and about your story than anything else. Then, of course, there's the places. Like, looking at something like Star Wars, you've got all these different planets across the galaxy, all these very interesting settings. But your game's going to have a setting too. Like, where does it take place? Does it take place at your school? Does it take place at the park? Does it take place in another galaxy? Like, I don't know. That's really up to you, but it does say a lot about your story by setting it in an interesting location. And then last but not least, there's, of course, the events that happen. When I was working on the Star Wars Rebellion game, I looked at all the Star Wars movies and I found, like, the important events that happened that people would remember. And I took these events and I put them in the game, and I allowed players to have these events happen whenever they wanted. So, for example, there's this picture of this card here of Han Solo frozen in carbonite that happens in one of the Star Wars movies. But now, when we're playing the game, players have a card that lets them do that, and they can choose when they do it. And so finding kind of those key events in whatever story you're trying to tell, and letting the players somehow be the ones to decide when to do them, is one of the fun parts about making thematic games. So when you're planning out your game, there are some important questions I would suggest asking yourself. And first off, I would say, who are your players? Are we specific people with names, or are we more a type of person? We, like in my Monopoly example, we're all real estate moguls. Like, we don't have names, but you have to decide, who is your player? What are they? And you can go as deep into that as you want, but it's important to decide who they are. And then you want to decide what their goals are. What are they trying to accomplish? Ultimately, how are they going to win the game? So when you make your game and you start showing it to people, one of the first things I always tell people is, who are you and what are you trying to do? And if you tell people those two things right at the beginning, it will really help them kind of understand your game. Oh, okay. Now that I know who I am and what I'm trying to do, all the other things that we're doing, we're moving around the board, we're doing this and that, it's all going to make sense once you explain those two things to your players. And then the next thing you're going to want to decide is, what are their obstacles? So they've got a goal of something they're trying to accomplish, but when you're telling a story, it's never as simple as, we could just walk up and we can take the bag of gold and we've won the game. There's always something in the way, whether it's some sort of personal struggle where it's something that I'm dealing with internally, or whether it's something in my environment, like maybe in order to get that bag of gold, I need to cross a desert. And so that could be an obstacle, or it could be the other players are obstacles because they're trying to stop you, or they're trying to do whatever that goal is before you can. And so it's important to decide what some of these things are. And the last thing that I always try to think about before I even start making a game is, what are some moments that you want to create? And you can do this before you even have an idea of how your game's going to play. Maybe you don't even know if players are on a board and moving around, or whether you're playing cards. Once you have an idea of who your players are and what their goals are, you can start imagining moments that you want to happen in your game. Like I mentioned earlier, like I want people high-fiving around the table. Like, okay, that's cool. Why would people high five? Think about like something that they might celebrate about, something exciting that you want to have happen. And the other example I used of, like, maybe someone betrays somebody else, like that's another moment that you have no idea how it actually happens in the game yet, but you know that it would be a very interesting moment where everybody would, I don't know, gasp aloud that they're so surprised that this person would turn against them, and they've been working together the whole game. Why would you do this to me? And so those are generally the questions that I ask myself before I start making and designing a game. Another important thing to think about is, what type of game are you trying to make? And by that, I mean, are all the players working against each other? I think that's the most common type of game people will recognize. A lot of games can only have one winner, whether you're playing something like checkers or chess or Scrabble, like there's usually just one winner, right? But a lot of modern games, a lot of games that come out nowadays, they've expanded that. There are more options than that. Another example is, you can make a team game where we've got groups of people, maybe it's 2 teams that are playing against each other, and only one team can win. So you've got somebody that's working with you, and you've got other people that are working against you. For example, most sports work that way, right? It's a game, but you've got people on your team. And then the more unique type of game that we're seeing a lot of recently is cooperative games. And these are board or card games where everybody is working together on the same team. These ones are more challenging to create, right? It's a lot more difficult because we have to not only have what we're doing, but there needs to be some sort of goal that we're accomplishing and some sort of obstacle that's not another player. A cooperative game could be as simple as, we are all working together to get points, and we need to get 100 points before the deck of cards runs out. That's a simple cooperative game. But there are other cooperative games, for example, this other Star Wars game I worked on, where there's a cooperative mode where all the players are different heroes working together, and they need to undertake missions, and the stormtroopers and the enemies and stuff, they're all controlled by cards, or they move very simply, and we're all working together to try to get to the end. So There are obviously more types of games, but I suggest that you pick kind of what direction you want to go in, because what type of game you make, it's going to change the feeling. If we're all working against each other or if we're all working together, people are going to feel very different while they're playing it, and they're going to either be working to stop each other or help each other. So there's a last element here to storytelling that I want to touch on very briefly. It's called emergent storytelling. This is a term that you may not be familiar with, but basically what it means is that the story itself doesn't come from the writing in the game. It doesn't come from the story in the game. It comes mostly from what the players do. And I've got a little picture here from the video game Among Us, which is very popular right now. And that's an example of an emergent game. It's a game where the story is very simple. We're walking around a spaceship trying to fix the different broken things. But the story really comes from the fact that somebody is an imposter and we don't know who it is, and they're trying to stop us from winning. So that's a game where you, as the game designer, don't have to make the story be on the cards and on the graphics. Instead, you give the players the tools to make a really interesting story happen. And there are lots of other games that do it this way. One way to create an emergent story is just to really think about, well, what do you want players to do and what the players want to do? I know you're not going to be playtesting your games for a while now, but when you start playing them, look at what players' comments are as far as, oh, I really wish I could do this thing. I really wish I could do this to other players, or I really wish that I could have a card that would let me accelerate whatever I'm trying to accomplish. And so by listening to your players, you could figure out, well, these are interesting ideas. These are things that might actually make the story more interesting. But the most important thing when you're creating a story in a game is make sure that everybody's having fun. So if you're creating a game that has different teams or different abilities, you want to make sure even if someone loses, they still walk away from the game with a smile on their face. They should still have had a good experience, and you don't want to make one player feel like left out or one player feel like they didn't get to do the fun thing that everybody else got to do. So I just reiterated some of these same questions here on this last slide. I'm not really going to dive into them too much, but I know your topic this year is healthy habits. And so walking through some of these same questions with your topic in mind might help you come up with ideas for what you might want to do. Like if it's healthy habits, like who are your players and what are their goals? Maybe you can look at the different list of the healthy habits and use that to come up with a goal. And maybe the goal itself will help you decide what the players are. You don't necessarily need to do this in order. And then you can look at what are the obstacles. So you could look at, well, what might prevent somebody from accomplishing their healthy habit. And it could be something normal or it could be something really weird and bizarre. It's really up to you. And that's, to me, the fun of making a game, is that you have control over what the story is going to be. And then just deciding what type of story you want to tell. Is it going to be funny? Is it going to be dramatic? Is it going to be serious? That decision, it's going to make your game feel very different. And it's going to decide a lot of the questions that you might not have even realized you had yet. So I would suggest asking yourself these questions as you're starting designing your game. And hopefully these discussion topics, these different things I went through will help you make a fun game and a more thematic game. Because personally, I just like playing games that have stories in them. I like playing games that let me do something that I wouldn't be able to do in my everyday life. And that's honestly the best part about gaming to me. So I'm happy to answer any question anybody has about thematic gaming, about game design, about any of the games I've worked on. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. That was such a great presentation on theme and storytelling and why it's important to add those pieces to your game concept as you're planning it through lesson one. So thanks so much. We did have one question come in while you were talking. So someone in the audience would like to know, are these the questions that are also asked when planning a movie or a video game rather than just a board game?
Yeah, I pressed the wrong button. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I was younger, I thought that I wanted to make video games, and so I actually went to school to work on programming and that sort of stuff. And then I found out that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, but I've seen enough of how video games are developed, and I know that there are a lot of similarities in how you develop a video game to when you develop a board game. And I would say video games are very thematic. Like a lot of them are, I mean, they're so visual, right? There's so much going on in them. And the same thing with movies too. I was talking about the topic of storytelling in games, but a lot of this is about storytelling in general. I mean, I've done a lot of research into kind of storytelling and writing and that sort of stuff, and I've done some of it, and you see these same themes and these same questions come up. I'm sure an author could give a much better explanation of like how you want to tell a story in a novel, or a screenwriter in a movie, but at the same time they are answering those same questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a lot of things with storytelling kind of spans all different types of stories, no matter what you're writing them for.
Mhm.
Awesome. So another question came in. What was your favorite story to write?
Whew, that's tricky. So I mean, I liked working in all of these different worlds that I got to work in, right? I got to do Star Wars stuff, and that was kind of a dream come true for me. But at the same time, I wasn't really writing a story in Star Wars, right? I was taking a world that already existed. Um, but the most recent game that I made, which I showed briefly with the comic book in it called The Initiative, that one was a lot of fun for me to write because I got to actually write a comic book as I was designing a game. And the way that that game works is that you read a page of the comic and then you play the game. And then after you play the game, you come back to the comic. And the story for that one was very interesting, in my opinion. It was about these four kids, these teenagers. They found a board game at a yard sale. And then you are taking the role of these kids playing this game. And so you get to see them go through their daily life. And then they get to play this board game as kind of their escape from reality, from their troubles. But the more that they play the game and the more you read in the comic, you start understanding that this isn't a normal game and that it's weirdly connected to their lives. And there's a mystery about where this came from and what it is. And so that's kind of the fun discovery in that story.
Wow, that's really fun. I love that. Awesome. So the next question is, does a board game need to have a story?
No, absolutely not. Those are the types of games that I usually play and design, but there are plenty of games where all you're doing is you're playing cards that have numbers and symbols on them, and there are rules for playing those, and you're trying to get the most points. You see that happen all the time, and there are plenty of really fun games like that. So you don't need to make a thematic game if that doesn't appeal to you.
Awesome. Thank you. And this one is maybe a little more specific, but how would you suggest telling a story with a dice game?
Sure. It depends what your other components are. So if I was designing a dice game, like what are you using the dice to do? I can think of a couple of dice games off the top of my head. You've got something like Yahtzee. I would say Yahtzee doesn't really have much of a story to it, right? But there are games that use that play very much like Yahtzee, but they have a story attached to them. There is a game called Dice Throne that there's a Marvel version of, which is basically Yahtzee, but we're different Marvel superheroes and we're trying to play Yahtzee to like trigger our special abilities and stuff.
So
And so you can really figure out if you've got an idea of what sort of stories you like or what sort of things are fun to you, you could honestly make a dice game about anything.
absolutely. Yes, we cannot wait to see what everyone comes up with. So students can make a board, card, or dice game. And so I know there's going to be a lot of great stories told through all of those mediums. But awesome, that was the last question that we had. So I just wanted to thank everyone for your thoughtful questions. If any other questions arise for either myself or for Corey, you can feel free to email those to events@legendsoflearning.com, and we're more than happy to answer any questions that come up as you are working through your other lessons. So thank you so much for joining us for lesson 1. We wish you the absolute best of luck on the rest of the challenge and hope you have a lot of fun. I absolutely cannot wait to see all of your submissions on December 15th.